I'm Diane Marina. I'm going to read from a book that was released a few years ago called It's Only Love. It's a book of short stories. And the story I'm going to read today is from Imperial Hotel, which is one of my favorites. And it tells the story of two young women falling in love in New York City in the 1940s. My path first collided with Lily's on a breezy New York morning, back when life was simpler, yet so much more difficult than it is today. It still makes me smile when I envision her walking into the Imperial Hotel as if the hotel belonged to her. At first glance, she appeared to be older than her 17 years, but that impression was given purely by her grace and posture. It was nearly a year before I would realize it, but I was instantly smitten. Wrapped in a substantial heavy wool coat with a silk scarf tied around her head to keep her strawberry blonde curls protected from the wind, she was inappropriately dressed for the season, as it was only mid-October. However, she was quite appropriately dressed for the weather itself, which felt as if it was actually mid-January. I will always remember that wretchedly cold winter, mainly because it brought me Lily. Here we both were, about to be introduced by our mothers, who had struck up a friendship of their own through their volunteer work at St. Luke's Parish on the Upper West Side. Mrs. Dandridge had impressed upon my mother the importance of finding me a husband. Astounded by the fact that at the ripe old age of 18 I had no prospects, Mrs. Dandridge insisted that she introduce me to her socialite daughter, who would no doubt prove a positive influence on me and open the doors to social opportunities. The three of us, my mother, Mrs. Dandridge, and I, were seated in the formal dining room of the Imperial, delicate cups of steaming tea before us, when Lily entered and marched toward our table. Her mouth was pursed in an unattractive scowl, and her eyes touched everywhere but on me, signifying her disinterest. Anyone with half a brain could tell this young woman was less than thrilled to be joining us. At last our eyes met, and the iciness of her blue eyes softened as she examined my face. The expression on her face changed from diffidence to curiosity as she studied my eyes, then the rest of me, before landing back on my eyes, which had never left her face. She extended a hand and announced, "I'm Lillian." Lily, actually, but my mother will be the first to tell you she abhors nicknames. Her self-satisfied smile told me that she reveled in going against her mother's wishes. Definitely a rebel, I thought, as a warm tingle radiated from my lower spine all the way up to between my shoulder blades. She removed her headscarf and coat, and then nonchalantly handed them to our server, who had arrived in her wake. As she shook my hand, I noticed the enormous diamond on her left hand. She repeated her self-introduction to my mother before sitting. Despite her flair for defiance, she had impeccable manners and showed my mother the highest level of respect. She placed a napkin in her lap and nodded in my direction. "You're Joan." More of a statement than a question, as she knew there was no one else I could be. I nodded. Her forthrightness seemed to bring out my innate shyness. I could feel my cheeks heating under her attention. I hoped she would attribute the pink color of my face to the unusually warm temperature in the hotel, or perhaps the steam from the tea. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Lily." My eyes quickly shifted to Lily's mother. I hoped to not see disapproval on her face over my use of Lily's preferred name. She either hadn't heard me or chose to ignore my use of the truncated version of her daughter's given name. Lily smirked as she poured a cup of tea for herself from the teapot in the center of our table, and then she focused on me, watching me curiously. I had the impression that I had garnered some favor with her because of my tiny rebellious act. My mother spoke as Lily added cream and sugar to her tea and stirred it. "Your mother tells me you're recently engaged, Lillian." "I am, Mrs. Blackstone. I'm engaged to the most marvelous man who ever walked God's green earth. We're planning the largest wedding New York has ever seen." Her smile showed perfect white teeth, except for the tiniest little chip in the one in the front. My mind wandered, dreaming up scenarios of how such a fine woman could have chipped a tooth. Anything to keep me from thinking of this beautiful young lady, whom I barely knew, marrying a man whom I knew not at all. My mind refused to consider why this troubled me, and I sipped my tea, hoping for something to distract me from my thoughts. Mrs. Dandridge and my mother began chattering excitedly about wedding details. I looked up to find Lily watching me. As I look back now, I like to think there was a dare present in her stare, but at that time, my young self didn't recognize it for what it was. She smiled delicately, and I noticed a smattering of light freckles across the bridge of her upturned nose before she obscured it with the teacup. The levity left her eyes when Mrs. Dandridge announced that despite her daughter's statement, she was not bound by blood to the Rockefellers, and the wedding would in fact not be the largest New York had ever seen. Suddenly, Lily appeared to be no older than her 17 years, and I smiled, feeling that we were at least on level ground. Relaxing, I realized how hungry I was when our server brought a lovely tray of finger sandwiches to go with our tea. During that first meeting, what had begun as an obligation to our mothers had become a flicker of something that might grow into a genuine friendship. Lily and I had agreed upon a day of shopping and lunch in an attempt to get to know each other better, and so I had taken off the day from my classes at Hunter College. I made certain the cab driver would wait for me before I hurried into the stone structure on the corner of 81st and Central Park West. Despite my long winter coat and my snug hat and gloves, the cold wind was biting wherever it found skin. Winter had come to New York City, and it was taking no prisoners. I shivered and wrapped my arms around myself as my heels clacked on the marble floor of the lobby of her apartment building. I just had time to wish I had worn a cape around my coat when I saw Lily exiting the elevator. I watched as she smiled and nodded at the elevator operator before catching a glimpse of me in the entryway and rushing toward me. "Oh, you poor girl, you look frozen. Are you sure you want to leave the elements today?" Lily placed her hands on her arms, her attempt to warm me, I surmised. What seemed to me to be an ever-present flush colored my neck and face in response to Lily's touch. No, Lily, don't be silly. I have a cab waiting for us." I was excited about spending the day with my new friend, and I didn't want to give her any reason to cancel our plans. Hopefully, I tossed a look over my shoulder to confirm that the driver was keeping his promise to wait for us. It's a blustery day, but we'll make the most of it, won't we? Her face was filled with concern for me, and my heart began to warm me from the inside out. I looked away to hide my feelings, which I myself found confusing. The pleasant day, yet disconcerting churning of my stomach had me rethinking my decision to pursue a friendship with this girl. I wasn't sure why, but even while my heart was encouraging me, my head was sending me a warning that Lily was dangerous. Ignoring my misgivings, I said brightly, "Let's go, shall we?" She smiled and reached into her handbag for a few coins for the doorman, then tucked the purse under her arm, hooked her other arm through mine, and led me to our waiting cab. The wind swirled her intoxicating scent of verbena around me, and it made me lightheaded as I stumbled on the curb, but Lily was there to keep me upright. "Oh dear, Joan, are you sure you're all right? We don't have to go out today if you're not feeling well." I shook my head vigorously. Despite my better judgment, I needed to be close to this girl, to spend whatever time with her she would allow. In the short time we had spent together, I felt more alive. I spent the day basking in Lily's exuberant personality. We lunched at one of Lily's favorite cafes on the Upper West Side, then strolled through Central Park. I linked my arm through hers, outwardly for warmth, but inwardly for the giddiness that touching her created inside me. The hour was late when the cab she hailed dropped me in front of my parents' brownstone. "What a wonderful day, Joni. We must do it again soon. Promise me." Her nose was pink from the cold, which our bones hadn't shaken during the short ride. I longed to place my palm on her cheek, to feel the cool smoothness of her skin. Instead, I grasped the door handle of the cab. I laughed. Her exhilaration was contagious. "I promise, Lily." She leaned over then and kissed my cheek, a soft bust that was so light I could easily have convinced myself it hadn't happened. Her lashes fluttered and her eyes burned into me. "Get inside so you can get warm. I'll see you soon." I quickly left the taxi before I could do something foolish, then hurried around the back of the cab and ran up the few steps to the front door. I glanced back at the taxi as the driver pulled into the moderate traffic of the side street on which our house was located. Lily was watching me, and she blew me a kiss before the taxi whisked her away. The city was awash in holiday spirit. The heavenly scent of chestnuts, pine, and apples seemed to hover over every corner of town. Intermittent snowflakes floated downward nearly every day as Christmas drew near. Lily and I had become inseparable, spending many a day and evening in each other's company. We shopped and lunched and strolled in Central Park. We even volunteered our time to work alongside our mothers at St. Luke's, sorting hand-me-downs for the poor or serving a meal to those in need. I began to see the real Lily, the sensitive, sweet young lady who hid beneath the fabricated veneer of a seemingly worldly 18-year-old. During this time, the real Lily emerged, and I was deeply attracted to this genuine side of her. When Lily and I did not have plans together, I attempted to stay busy because idle time meant constantly thinking of Lily, thoughts of her that were nowhere near appropriate. She awakened thoughts and feelings in me that I knew could be dangerous. And then there was the ever-present, inescapable knowledge that Lily belonged to someone else and was committed to be married by the end of summer. I had yet to meet Andrew, her fiance, but that would soon change as we were to be introduced at the Dandridge family holiday party. My mother's vocal excitement sporadically erupted through our brownstone from the day the postman handed the invitation to my mother on our stoop in late November. Days of shopping for us for the right outfits, both for herself and for me, ensued. My father was left to his own devices with only the instruction that he not embarrass my mother with his choice of attire for the affair. My mother looked forward to the event not only because she hoped it would boost her social standing, but because she was praying that I would at last find a candidate for a husband. Night after night, after dinner, our home was abuzz with the murmur of my mother's devout novena. I knew she was praying that a large number of eligible bachelors would come flocking around me at the party. At the other extreme, I grew more nauseated with each passing day that brought us closer to the gala event. The thought of meeting Lily's beloved, as well as the potential of my being shopped out to any man who might be in the market for a wife, filled me with dread. Inevitably, the fateful evening arrived, and my mother was fussing over every minute detail before the three of us left for the Dandridge party. Every hair on my head was held in place by herringbone combs and pins. My mother stood behind me, both of us facing a floor-length mirror as we admired my reflection. She had decided I would wear a pale blue dress, which would bring out my eyes and contrast nicely with my dark shoulder-length hair. I did so with pleasure, dressing for my Lily instead of for the gentleman that my mother hoped I would impress this evening. I borrowed a pearl necklace and matching earrings from my mother in hopes that Lily would find me stunning.